I'm Richard Zackon. I facilitate the Council for Research Excellence, which is a community of Nielsen clients who look to improve methodology in media. And what I'm speaking about today with Rick Ducey, who did the study, is a study we're calling UX, the user experience cross-platform, cross-screen actually. And what distinguishes it, there's a lot of research. The CRE a couple years ago did a major project called the Video Consumer Mapping Study, which looked at behavior and looked at it as an objective phenomenon, and we had observers following people throughout the day. And at the conference here, SIM is doing another behavioral study, Touchpoints, also looking at consumer behavior, and that one's over time. Our study is actually a meta-analysis. We've not done original research yet. We've looked at the research in both industry and academics to get inside the subjective sense of what's going on for the viewer as the viewer is making choices and using media across screens. So we've gathered close to 150 research articles. We're going to be exploring them. We've made an archive available, which I can tell you about. And the idea is over the next few months, we'll be absorbing those studies. We'll be reaching out to the industry to get points of view other than the council's point of view. And the fourth quarter, we'll put out some RFPs looking at what original research do we want to do informed by the literature. We don't always have that luxury to do that in this industry, but we're looking to do some thoughtful work in that regard. So what those studies will be, based on the studies we find, we'll look to find the gaps, both the gaps and then the interesting new questions that people would have to help us answer that, because clearly there's a lot of activity across screens, and much of the measurement involves what they're doing. What we're looking for is what's going on inside that gray matter inside the head of the user. We want to know why users choose, let's say viewers or the audience, probably a better word, why the audience chooses the screen they do, how that choice of screen impacts what goes on for them as they view, how the different categories, how social media affects the viewing, when users are using video games, how that affects participation. So this is a whole new world of questions. We no longer have the family sitting around TV. We no longer have individual people sitting around watching a little box. We have a lot of different screens now, a lot of different contexts. Context is important. We have some what you might call proto-theories of best screen. What's the best screen available? We have some questions which deepen that. So, and then really, a big part of this is what are the best methods to get at these questions? So we've laid out what we know, or what we think we know, and then based on that, we'll sit around and ask ourselves, well, what do we want to ask? What do we want to find out? How does one screen displace another screen? How much use is complementary, et cetera, context.
Okay, so we'll fast forward a year. You've done the research, you've done some original work. Now, what's the story that will come from that? How would you advise or guide advertisers, media planners, media buyers, creative folks?
Part of the genesis of the study is that we have a lot of screens, and everyone's been talking about cross-platform for a few years. But how does one, let's take it from the advertiser's perspective, how does an advertiser know how to place a value on the alternative screens available him to purchase? So when a media company is offering him X number of high definitions, or I just saw a presentation on 3D, when there's opportunities for 3D or mobile or iPads, or goodness knows what's going to be out next year. One of the challenges by the time this comes out, there's going to be some newer screens available we hadn't even thought of yet, is what kind of value do you put on the advertising impression that each of those screens generate? They're not all worth the same. And so it's questions like that from the advertiser's perspective. How does the second exposure on a different screen impact? How does the third exposure, et cetera? So that's what we're looking to do. And part of what we want to do is to develop a taxonomy so that we can intelligently talk about these alternatives, because the screens have been coming out so quickly that the industry is struggling at conferences like this to wrap our collective minds around it. So we would like to wrap our minds around it with the advantage of some actual empirical data.
Is there kind of additional brand lift to doing the TV and then having my impression seen online or on mobile?
Well, we're certainly including commercials as part of what's being viewed, so that's going to become an important part. And one of the issues is that a lot of these studies, and there has been some good research done, by some companies that you mentioned. But typically it's done by either the buyer or the seller, often the agency, but not collectively done by having the same group of researchers of buyers, agencies, sellers sitting around the table. And that's the advantage of an organization like the Council for Research Excellence, because we have all sides there. So rather than a study come out with the parameters of the study determined by a single industry sector, we're looking to bring in the industry before we conduct the research. As researchers, we all know, research can prove a lot of different things. But for acceptance and for quality, we're probably, I'll drop the probably, we're better off when you are collaborative with people with different points of view and different financial interests than one's own. So that's the idea here, that's why we first examine the literature to see what is out there, and then we'll go on. And I'd say what you'll see is more efficiency in spending. There will be a better understanding of what works under what circumstances. That now we have a lot of anecdotal information, which is usually provided by one player in the industry. So to get, as I said, a collection of people jointly wrapping their minds around it, I think you'll see better use of the media. From the consumer standpoint, you should see a more satisfying viewer experience for the viewer if the programmers and the advertisers both understand what it is that's occurring for the viewer.